I'm glad you brought up technology. Igor, let me ask you, so the technological tools certainly have become more sophisticated.
Right.
Do you ever wonder, this is something, a question I ask myself, technology, does it have a sense of purpose and direction? Do you feel, in the work you're doing at LinkedIn and the platforms themselves, that they have a kind of a common horizon that they're working towards?
I don't believe that there is a sense that's inherent to a platform that it knows where it's going. It doesn't have, it's not a sentient being, neither is technology. To paraphrase the father again, it's like, if you think about wellness and happiness, it has many dimensions. And I think with respect to humanity, we very rarely look above just one generation. You come to the planet at some point of time and you leave it at some point of time, and you look at your well-being within that scope. Maybe you extend a little bit because you try to foretell what your kids are going to be, and that's maybe a teeny tiny bit a bit more. But in the grand scheme of things for humanity, it's inconsequential. It's an approximation. So nobody, or we don't have the capacity today, I would say, to actually forecast. Here's where we should go, there or there.
Now, how do you know whether what you're doing in terms of building AI and developing these platforms, how do you know if you're doing well or if you're not? What is your measure of success in this case?
If you're enabling individuals to achieve a task that they would want to do. Like, for example, in our case at LinkedIn, it's about creating economic opportunity. So if you enable individuals to actually look at their career or their professional life, and you're enabling them to manage them in the right situation, then you're doing good. It's not me telling you that you should have that job or that job or that job, but within your aspiration of your careers, what is the path or what is the ideal things that I can help you get?
But there would be some jobs that you wouldn't want to encourage, right? There would be certain realms or, say, illegal activities. In fact, certain websites have been recently closed down by the U.S. government precisely because they seem to be encouraging exploitative industries. So it seems like there's going to be some ethical dimension even with your platform.
Yeah, there is, certainly. There's some type of jobs, or there's recently this crackdown on Bitcoin, for example, that can be abused in multiple dimensions, that you're trying to actually make sure that it doesn't really go there. Yeah.
Obviously, companies are making ethical decisions all the time, and so they may not have a very clear sense or tangibly see or can understand this horizon they're moving towards, but when you make a decision, you are making a judgment, and so you are kind of shaping a trajectory. I want to talk a little bit about Star Trek, and Delia, please don't roll your eyes at me.
I'll have to sit this
It
out.
starts from a very good perspective, right? Because the world of Gene Roddenberry is very utopian.
Right.
Right. There's no need. We all friends. We all really good, and it was really in contrast to, I guess, in the 70s or in the 60s, in the Cold War, right?
Right.
So it's not from a great place.
I mean, how many, there's so many people. I mean, when I meet a Trekkie, I always find it very fascinating to speak to them. I mean, one of the first questions I ever asked them is, why? Like, why is this so important to you? And, at first, I'll be honest, I thought it was just the allure of the tricorder and the spaceships. So it was just cool. But when you hear them talk about it.
Teleport.
It's right, or the transporter, super cool, right?
Yeah.
Holodecks, man. Okay, but when you speak to them, what really kind of, what's important to them, what really kind of excites and motivates them about that kind of Star Trek TNG universe is it is a utopian form of humanity. Humanity has worked through its problems, right, and arrived at a place where, questions of ethnicity, questions of I'm a man or a woman, and how much can I contribute? Money, and there's no longer greed is not something that kind of motivates people in the Star Trek universe. Hunger is not present. So we do seem, as a species, to have a sense of where we kind of want to go. I mean, that seems to be, it was a utopia that we want to realize, right? So what is it, why is it that Star Trek's able to kind of capture our imaginations and inspire people to kind of change their lives, and be these Trekkies? Why can't we find a tangible way of doing that in reality?
Well, one thing that strikes me about the utopia of Star Trek is that it exists on an artificial man-made environment. And it does not exist on Earth, right? So the premise is that there are things that are happening on Earth. There's some inhabitable planets, some uninhabitable. But the fact is that they're living in a very sterile environment. It's almost like a hospital. They're almost wearing hospital gowns that are sterile, right? And so there's a kind of a diminution of possibilities. They don't have to deal with the messiness of trees and air and animals and the possibility of having sunburn. Whereas this is something where if you live on a planet, you're always dealing with many contingencies that impinge upon your own desires and reality. And so what happens is that it's true, they have a sort of peace, a lack of hunger, but they also have fewer options. And what they have to do is they have to, in order to have fun, they go to the holodeck and they escape this utopia in order to have a real experience. Or they go and they fight with other civilizations that are against humanity. So this to me is so you see the pros and the cons at the same time. And the cons can be even diminished within the show. They're not really acknowledged explicitly. But to me, watching this from outside, I think this would get sad. I like to walk outside. It's like being on a submarine your whole life. It's nice, but maybe it's nice to breathe the ocean air.
Okay, I mean, if I'm a Trekkie, though, so I would say, I mean, the same reasons I step into a submarine, right? I mean, I'm doing that for a practical purpose. I don't love living in a submarine, right? I do it because it's my job. I can't wait to get back to dry land, and I expect the crew of the Enterprise feels the same way, right? I recall seeing a few episodes where they are able to, put their feet on real ground, and they're very excited to be there. So let me ask you: is the horizon itself, is having some kind of utopia shaped? Is that advantageous? Is it important for us to have some kind of idea of what humans should be living like in late 21st century and then make that our target and start making decisions to get there?
I thought you would have picked up some other dimension or some other reasoning. In the end, the headquarters is in San Francisco. That's a beautiful city. The bridge is still there until some episode when it gets destroyed. And there's that great episode with the whale, which is in San Francisco too, right? I think it's because it's pushing it so far ahead that you sort of start to forget, or you say that at some point of time humanity goes over its boundary by nationalities. But if you look up, let's say, some years back in Europe, we thought 2 world wars around, the first one on some incomprehension. Dialogue wasn't there, supposedly. The second one certainly was clear that it was getting there, but we fought very hard. We created the European Union afterwards, and the principle was that let's not do this again. And you can look today, that principle is disappearing a little bit. You don't hear it anymore. You don't hear people saying, well, no, it's an economic grouping, if you want, a union. But it isn't. It's a union of showing individuals we are the same. I speak French, you speak German. We don't have to be enemies forever. I know we thought 3 times already. Maybe that's enough to getting together. And then you have this, nowadays it goes back and forth because of the economic situation. And Star Trek to me is saying, like, you know what, these are all little steps, baby steps. Getting there will make lots of progress. The UN also is not that old. And if you imagine we continue there, then I would agree with you. Maybe that's a nice place to be. I actually don't know too much about Star Trek on the religion aspect. I've asked myself a couple of times, like, imagine Humanity 2.0 would be like, imagine you find life somewhere else, and now you know that it exists. What does that mean about us? How does that define us? How does that define us from a religious or spiritual as well as beings?
I don't think it's really useful to have only an idea of utopia in mind, frankly, quite outside of Star Trek, which is a fiction. And we know that utopias that people have attempted to put into place in real time have turned out to be quite disastrous. So while I think it's important to have an ideal, and it might be a Star Trek community, but the danger is that that goes into a kind of sterile perfectionist thing where, frankly, what's really exciting about life and trying to overcome things and meet difficulties and meet challenges, that's the point of being human, right? And the point of being human on Earth, is that there's a lot of suffering to overcome. And I think part of the, not only the Christian idea, certainly it's found in many religions around the world, is that there will always be evil in the world. So we can't assume or even really desire a kind of perfect world where I do everything perfectly and you're perfect, and that's just rather boring, isn't it? I mean, we have to have our challenges, we have to work towards an ideal, but we also have to be very realistic. I mean, the Pope likes to say, know the devil. I mean, there's always an element of evil and even just selfishness in our human nature that has to be overcome. So I'm not sure the ideal should be a completely sort of, perfect world.
Your question about whether or not we should have a common horizon, to me, is very, very interesting, because if we think about it, the human being, we're upright animals. And the nature of being upright is that we can see to the horizon. And an animal like a dog or a cat, these animals, they actually have their faces down, so they don't have a horizon. What they have are individual interests. And because we are able to see far, we are also able to have something in common, namely a common goal, a common trajectory. I would claim actually that by nature we all have a common horizon. It exists. What we need to do is have people look up and to look forward into the future together. If we imagine two people walking side by side, they have a common horizon because they're friends. And then if they look up into the stars, they recognize there's something that transcends the horizon. And so I would say in a certain way, in order to answer your question, really what we need to do is stop acting like animals, pure beasts, we are animals, but go beyond our individual interests that has zero horizon and look up and see human nature as it already exists. And this is what we want to encourage.
Okay, so,
But
go ahead.
to piggyback on what you were saying also, that uniformity is not removing diversity. And yes, we are human, yes, we have different perspectives to that common horizon, and we should embrace them instead of saying, no, no, this is not good, this is not good, this is the one that means, that we aspire to. And I think utopias in the past were too much defined by saying this is the ideal and we should all gather around it, compared to just break it that and change them all to say, yes, it's fine that we have these different perspectives, but we should have that common horizon.